Hooper. What exactly can you do with these things of yours?
You know Quint is desperate when he's actually willing to listen to Hooper.
Shark, put that cage. You got any better suggestions?
So as a last-ditch effort, Hooper goes into that shark cage with a harpoon that ends in a needle full of strychnine. It's a somber scene.
I got no spit.
It's like they know he's screwed, but there's nothing else left to try. Even Quint looks like he hates what Hooper has to do.
From this moment on, you will now be known as Sharkbait.
Sharkbait! Ooh-ha-ha!
Okay, this really is one smart big fish, as Quint likes to say. He actually swims away, then loops around and rams the cage from behind, causing Hooper to drop the harpoon. In what is one of the most intense scenes in the movie, the shark sticks its head into the cage and tries to get Hooper. But he remains just out of reach.
Sharkbait! Ooh-ha-ha!
Eventually he's able to get out through the top and get away.
It's getting away!
Of course, the other two don't know that. They just pull up the mangled shark cage and figured that it ate Hooper. They don't have much time to grieve, though, until... Whoa! Yeah, this scene... This is, yeah. Wow. Seriously, Quint's death is just brutal, no matter how many times I see it. No quick cuts, no extreme camera angles, not even any music, just screaming. Lots of screaming. And this only happens about 20 minutes after Quint tells us about his experience with sharks and how this is basically his worst fear. That's just wrong. By the way, his death in the book was a lot more like Captain Ahab's, where he threw a spear, got tangled in the rope, got pulled under the water, and drowned. Much as I love Quint and hate to see him die anyway, his death in the movie is a lot cooler. And now Brody is all alone in the sinking boat. Whoops, not anymore. What was Hooper saying earlier about those cans of compressed air?
You screw around with these tanks and they're gonna blow up.
Wait for it.
You son of a...
Epic!
That shark would have swam backwards pretty quick for a few seconds.
Oh, and thanks so much, Mythbusters, for ruining this for us.
I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Nah, I still love you, crazy ginger. Yay, look who's back!
Quint.
They sure don't mourn Quint for very long. Well, he was kind of an asshole, so I guess I can't blame him.
We get in on those?
I used to hate the water. I can't imagine why.
And the end. So there you have it, Jaws. Aside from being scary, it's also a lot of fun. It just has that Spielbergian charm to it. Spielberg movies always have such likable characters. Sometimes it's hard to put your finger on why you like them, you just do. Because it's a Spielberg movie and it just comes with the territory.
Give me a break.
It was such a big success that other movie studios started distributing their big release action and adventure movies in the summer. Starting with The Omen, and then Star Wars, and and it's still happening today. Speaking of Spielberg movies, look how many there are on here. But there is a downside to the movie's success. The movie gave the great white shark the image of a man-eater in the public mind. Peter Benchley, writer of the novel the movie was based on, was quoted as saying this: "Considering the knowledge accumulated about sharks in the last 25 years, I couldn't possibly write Jaws today. Not in good conscience, anyway. Back then, it was generally accepted that great whites they ate people by choice. Now we know that almost every shark attack on a human is an accident. The shark mistakes the human for its normal prey." On a lighter note, there is another downside to the success of Jaws. Its sequels. One thing I noticed recently is that everyone loves to talk about Jaws 3D and Jaws Revenge. No one ever mentions Jaws 2. After seeing it recently, I can see why. Of course, the first Jaws was great. Jaws 2 doesn't live up to the original at all, but it's not hilariously bad like the two sequels that came after it. Basically, it's kind of forgettable. It clearly wasn't directed by Spielberg. You can tell just by how little you're able to care about the characters. This guy looks kind of familiar, though.
What are you gonna do today, Napoleon?
Whatever I feel like I want to do. God!
The only likable character in this movie is Brody. Roy Scheider returned for this role, much as he didn't want to, but he doesn't have enough screen time to save the movie.
Take the old man in the sea with you.
Plot is pretty similar to the first one, except this one has Brody mistaking a school of fish for a shark.
Out of the water! Out of the water now!
He gets fired for causing a panic.
It's just bluefish!
The climax centers around a group of annoying teenagers. Especially this girl. Yeah, show as many close-ups as you want, movie. You are not gonna make me feel sorry for this whiny little twit. They end up stranded on a boat wreck and Brody has to save their sorry asses. By getting the shark to bite down on a power cable, of course. How else? Duh. Also, early on, the shark gets one side of its face burned, so I guess the scar gives him character. Or something. The movie script actually had several rewrites. One involved the sons of Brody and Quint hunting the new shark. Can't imagine that not being repetitive. A later one was a prequel based on the sinking of the USS Indianapolis, the story told by Quint in the first film. That might have been interesting. I'm not going to go into Jaws 3D and Jaws Revenge too much, since they've already been covered by people on the site who did a much better job than I ever could. But I am going to point out a couple interesting things. I caught a marathon of the Jaws movies on the 4th of July, and I noticed that a lot of the scenes people make fun of in the 3rd and 4th movies are possibly meant to pay homage to the original, because they take the same concept and crank it up to 11. Unfortunately, the end result is laughable. Remember the famous glass-breaking scene in Jaws 3D? It also happened in the first movie, only it was more believable, if not technically possible, because of how it was shot and the fact that it doesn't use lazy CG. Remember the roaring shark in Jaws the Revenge? Yeah, of course you do. The shark kinda roared in the first movie. Maybe. Could be the sound of the water resistance as he pokes his head up, and I'm never 100% sure if it's actually a roar. If it's there, it's very subtle, and kind of unsettling if you don't think about it too much. whereas the fourth movie just repeatedly hit you over the head with that awful stock reptilian roar. Oh, and aside from Jaws 2, where the shark was electrocuted and its charred body just sank into the water, every movie has to end with a shark exploding, and it gets increasingly ridiculous with each one. Of course, the first one utilized a can of compressed air. Yeah, I know, not technically possible, but at least it's a popular belief that a can of compressed air can explode, and that ending was pretty epic for its time. Jaws 3D used a grenade, which does make sense as far as I know, but the explosion looked pretty ridiculous, at least without the 3D effect. Oh, and its jaws are flying towards us. How clever! Not. Jaws the Revenge. Oh boy. Well, the shark has somehow levitated itself completely out of the water where it gets impaled on the broken bowsprit of the boat and explodes like a shark-shaped balloon filled with chum. Oh, and you know what the funny part is? That's supposedly the better version of the ending. In the original version, the shark does not explode and pulls the boat into the water with its weight. But for some reason, that didn't test well with the audiences, so they changed it so that the shark exploded. Because everything is better with an explosion. It's debatable which one is worse, in my opinion. The explosion one is stupid for obvious reasons, but at least that version was edited to the point where you could barely tell what happened. Which is normally not a good thing, but it is in this case. In the original version, the camera lingered on the floating shark for a long time, and how absurd it is really had a lot of time to sink in. In both cases, you really have to wonder what the hell the director was smoking. Now, Jaws 3D takes place at SeaWorld, of course, where Michael Brody, that's the older of the two Brody kids, is on the staff, and he's played by Dennis Quaid. Jaws the Revenge completely ignores the continuity of Jaws 3, considering itself the true third movie. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. The director of Jaws the Revenge thought that Jaws 3 was so bad that he wanted to pretend like it didn't exist so he could replace it with his superior movie, Jaws the Revenge. It's just funny for so many reasons. Lorraine Gary returns for this movie, and in concept it's cool to have the movie that centers around the mom of the Brody family, who is mainly just in the background in the previous two movies she was in. Too bad it's such a god-awful movie. There was actually a rather important plot element that was dropped from the script, but it was still in the novelization. It had to do with a voodoo witch doctor who had a feud going with the Brody family, and he'd sent this shark after them. It sounds kind of stupid to me, but at least it would explain why every member of the Brody family seems to be shark bait.
Enough of the shark bait.
Shark bait! Ooh, badoo.
They even left in a reference to it, which is pretty sloppy.
Come on, can't believe that voodoo. Sharks don't commit murder, they don't pick out a person.
Oh, and speaking of Michael, not only is he not played by Dennis Quaid, but is it just me or does he kind of resemble Hooper from the first movie? He's even a marine research scientist, so he even has a similar job as Hooper. What's especially funny about that is it makes me think of a subplot from the novel that involved Ellen Brody having an affair with Hooper. If Michael wasn't already a kid in the first movie, he could be their love child. Speaking of the book, I've only read about half of it, and it was a long time ago, so I don't remember it too well. But everything I've read about it implies that this was a rare case of the movie adaptation being an improvement over the book. The characters were not so likable, and the book displayed a negative view of humanity in general, hinting at the idea that the shark attacks was divine justice. Spielberg was even quoted as saying that when he read the book, he found himself pulling for the shark. But the book is definitely well written in some ways. The shark attacks are a lot more graphic, and they're very well described, so it's definitely worth a read if only for that. Particularly the girl's death in the beginning. You can actually read that part on Amazon.com, since it's one of those books where they put up the first few pages. If you like it, give the book a shot. Well, that about wraps up this episode on Jaws. It is a classic. It put both Steven Spielberg and Peter Benchley on the map, and it's easy to see why. It even changed the movie industry in its own little way. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it! That's it for now. See you next time.
Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. I had a little drink about an hour ago and I got it right to my head. Wherever I'm near, on land or sea or foam, You can always hear me singing.
Oh, shit!